Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we have a number of paranormal stories for your listening pleasure. And I also want to draw your attention to a favourite channel of mine, A Warning to the Curious. Some of you might have seen it already, but it's hosted by my friend Warren, who tells a number of creepy tales. I personally really enjoy his channel, and his latest video actually features a pretty cool skinwalker story. Or does it? You should definitely check it out. I'm going to link it in the description and at the end of the video. It would certainly mean a lot if you could go over and watch it. Drop him a comment and let him know what you thought. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My family, especially the children, have always been bothered by paranormal activity. My mom, dad and I gained guardianship of my nephew, Memphis, when he was a newborn. He never had any trouble sleeping by himself until my dad passed away and we had to move in with my older brother in Oklahoma. He was immediately terrified of the bathroom, closet, and to sleep alone. He was around 6 at the time, so could somewhat articulate what he was seeing. He always referred to it as the smiley guy. Creepy as hell, I know. And when we asked him to draw this smiley guy, what he drew was a brown monster-looking thing with a sharp, bloody smile. As I mentioned before, we were living with my older brother Dusty. He also had a son, Leyland, but was much younger than Memphis, so couldn't really explain what he was seeing, only described it as the Grinch, and would get so scared and cry so hard from night terrors and seeing this thing that he'd be able to turn blue and pass out. I slept in the room nearest the bathroom, and could without a doubt feel this extremely heavy, evil, negative energy. I didn't even want to go to the bathroom by myself either, but I had to put on a brave face for my nephew and take them to the bathroom and try to distract them. It was hard though, because I could feel it behind me when we were in the bathroom, and they'd tell me it was behind me. So kinda hard to ignore. So those bathroom trips were done as fast as humanly possible. My nephew Memphis is now 13, and does not remember the smiley guy, just what we've told him. He sees shadow people and hears whispering at night though. My sister Jenny has a daughter called Thule, who was 2 at the time. They lived in a haunted house together, and, ironically, they both felt a horrid, evil presence near the bathroom at the end of the hallway. She wouldn't go to the bathroom by herself, and wouldn't sleep by herself. Jenny is very religious and would pray every night, but to no avail. Her daughter would be playing and all of a sudden begin crying and say, "David, David," and point at nothing. We didn't actually know anyone called David, and this went on for quite a while. The crying about David took a toll on my sister mentally, and it all came to a head one night as they were sleeping when my sister woke up, seeing Tully's legs being lifted by an invisible force from the ankle, and her legs up in the air as if they were trying to pick her up by the feet and hang her upside down. My sister grabbed her and ran to the living room and prayed herself to sleep. She moved out shortly after, for obvious reasons, and later found out that a man had died in the home. The landlord conveniently left that information out. Now, and finally, my daughter. A few months ago she got up from our bed to go to the bathroom. Nothing out of the ordinary, she always does this. The next thing I know, she comes flying back to our room and is crying, saying she's seen a man with a piece of his body missing. So once again, another one of the children in my family refuses to go to the bathroom alone at night. She also told me she was going to the bathroom and her hand was inside the shower. She came around the shower door and tried to grab her dress and pull her in from the toilet, as our toilet and shower are fairly close to one another. I don't know what this is, why all the kids are being tormented, but I will end this on a brighter note. My beloved Aunt Sherry on my mum's side got sick in 2016. She lived in Texas and we lived in Oklahoma. We went down to visit her in March of 2016 when my daughter had turned 2. Since we lived in separate states, My Aunt Sherry had only seen my daughter once when she was a baby. During our visit, my aunt was so sick, she didn't want the kids to see her that way and have those be the last memories she had of her. So my daughter never saw her at the hospital. We stayed for about a week and things actually were looking up for my aunt. But unfortunately, not long after we got back to Oklahoma, we got the call that she had passed. Some time goes by and my daughter is laying with my mum looking at various pictures of family members that my mum has all over her wall. My daughter would then point to a picture and ask, "Who's that?" My mum would tell her and so on. Then my daughter pointed at my mum's open door, which led to an empty hallway, and said, "And that's Sherry, right?" and gave a shy smile and wave. I want to stress my daughter has no memories of Sherry being alive. There aren't even any pictures of her as an adult in our house, just of her and my mum as kids. My mum told me this, and I was very happy that my favourite aunt got to know my baby, even if we couldn't see her. One day as I was cleaning and my daughter was playing in her room, I asked as I was walking down the hallway, "Are you alright playing by yourself, honey?" And she said so matter-of-factly, "I'm not alone, I'm playing with Sherry." I honestly don't know if my daughter realizes Sherry is dead. She talks about how funny she is and how nice she is and how happy it makes her to see her. Just the other day she said, "I'm surprised Sherry didn't come see me today, I was feeling sad." And after a few days my mum knocked on the door and my daughter asked, "Who's that?" And I said that it was Grandma. "Oh, I thought it was Sherry." And then she carried on with her day. Most of the things my family have experienced have been horrible, so it's nice to know my amazing aunt is still looking out for my girl. It should be noted I personally have never seen ghosts, not as a child nor adult, and although I have had horrible sleep paralysis, I have never seen a ghost. I'm 27 years old now, and it has been a long time since I have stayed overnight at my neighbor's house. Every time I stayed overnight there, I just had a bad feeling. One night when I was 11, it was the Patriots versus Carolina in the Super Bowl. My neighbors hosted a Super Bowl party, and after 10 of us kids were all hanging out and ended up spending the night there. We mostly watched the Puppy Bowl, 'cause we were kids and one kid really loved Brady and made us watch some of the game. The game came and went, and we were all trying to stay up as late as possible since the parents all passed out. Looking back, I realize now they all got super drunk. It must have been about 3 a.m. when all of us kids woke up to a loud crashing like glass breaking in the bathroom. We could clearly see the bathroom from where we were, and all the adults stayed upstairs and had their own bathroom. There was no reason for them to come downstairs and use this one. Additionally, we never saw anyone leave the bathroom in the hour that we sat there and watched the door. In the morning, obviously us kids got up super early because we're kids, we woke up the adults and told them what happened. They didn't believe us, and blamed it on us. It's hard for me to explain. In the bathroom, there is a sink immediately to your right. Above the sink is a mirror, and above the mirror is a shelf with a lip that prevents its contents from slipping off the shelf. When we walked in, one of the big, maybe 1-liter cologne bottles had seemingly been thrown off the shelf above the mirror. It was about 20 feet across the bathroom from that shelf to the tub. All the glass from the cologne bottle was shoved up against the side of the bathtub. No glass was below the shelf. It was as if the bottle had been thrown very hard against the side of the tub and stayed there. There was a window to the side in the bathroom, but it was small enough that a possum couldn't even fit through it. And this wasn't the last time. For example, by the way, this was a year after the events of the previous story. The family went to Panama, and I was asked to take care of their gerbils in the meantime. The first time I ever went over there, the house was empty. It's the first time that I'd ever been in the house, and it was alone. So, they gave me a key for the back. No issue. This was usually the way I would come in anyway, but it's hard to describe verbally. The second I stepped in this house, I got this chilling feeling like I shouldn't be there. To be clear, I had to enter there in order to go through their driveway to get to their garage and go onto their back-screened porch and then access the back door, and never once did I get a bad feeling before. This includes in the previous story, no bad feeling, and I had no idea about the history of the house. But when I walked in, the air felt heavy, and every nerve in my body told me to get out. I knew that I had to feed their gerbils, so I forced myself to get the food and water and to just leave. It was such a strong feeling of hate and anger. Apparently not the last owner, but the owner before that had hanged himself in the bathroom I spoke about before. Go figure. Maybe he just didn't like me. Despite having a comfy flight from Manila to Sydney, I still felt tired. After passing through immigration, I immediately went to the arrival hall, loaded my Opal card, and then rode a train to my mate's flat to Burwood. It was raining when I arrived in Sydney, at only 18 degrees. The warm shower and the bed were the only two things I looked forward to. It was still raining when I woke up. The overcast weather made the day bleak and gloomy. Then I remembered the things I watched online a few days ago, and one of them were the ghost tours of Sydney. I asked my mate about it, and the next thing I knew, he already booked us an extreme ghost tour on the weekend, after my trip to Melbourne. Sydney was not a glamorous city back in the 19th century. Diseases such as smallpox, Spanish influenza, and bubonic plague were prevalent. To mitigate the spread of these infectious diseases, all ships entering Sydney's harbour must be checked by the doctor. Even if there was only one sick passenger aboard, everyone was required to stay at the quarantine station for 40 days. Those who were sick were brought to the hospital for treatment. And at least 1,600 people were brought here from 1830 to 1984. And a total of 570 people have perished there. Today, Q Station serves as a hotel, a conference centre, and part of a Sydney Harbour National Park. Our extreme ghost tour was scheduled to start at around 9 p.m. to beat the weekend traffic of North Sydney. We left Burwood at around 6 and drove all the way to Manly. We had our dinner there just before heading to Q Station, located east of Manly Beach. We arrived at 8:30, way too early for the tour, so we went straight to the front desk and toured around. Some of the original relics like tombstones, luggage, and clothes are still there. It felt eerie upon seeing those personal belongings, who once belonged to people who got quarantined here for over 100 years ago. We met up with the group at 9:30. Our guide, Bob, told us we should not rationalize everything we see during the tour. Jason and I are both air traffic controllers, and in our work we rationalize everything. This time, we have to leave everything behind and open up our senses. We were given EMF sensors, the instrument that are used to detect anomalies in the surrounding electromagnetic field. The experts believe that ghosts manifest themselves as this form of energy. Our first stop was the chamber. There are 2 rooms, both that are not big, with a floor area of approximately 50 square meters. We were locked inside for at least 5 minutes just to observe everything. I didn't feel anything in the first room, except that it faintly smelt of hay. I didn't mind, because I thought it used to be a barn. But in the second room I felt something. The surrounding air felt heavy. I felt like an unknown force pressing my cheeks. It was quite difficult to breathe at some point. As we were out, Bob told us that it used to be a gas chamber, and that about 40 people were locked inside for sanitary reasons. Now it all made sense why we felt heavy inside, and why I felt claustrophobia inside the room. Our second stop was the hospital. It was quite a long hike to the quarantine hospital, and during the early days it was harder to get to. You needed to climb the steep walkways, Basically, when you're on top, you're completely isolated. The hospital is located near the cliff overlooking Sydney Harbour. There are several buildings around, including the quarters of the nurses and doctors. Hospitals, no matter how modern their facilities are, can get creepy at night, but this one was way creepier than I thought. We first entered the doctor's quarter. It was dark but cold inside the room, and there were 3 bunk beds in it. As I sat and leaned on the lower bunk while listening to Bob's stories, I felt something was pinching my lower back. I shrieked and Bob caught my attention. I told Bob it was nothing. We went into the main hospital room. It was quite big and there were 6 beds. Feeling brave, I lied down on one of the beds and tried to make some connections. I don't know how, I just closed my eyes and felt nothing. And honestly, the bed felt so soft and comfortable. I transferred to an adjacent bed near the wall, and the moment I lied down, it felt weird. It felt like something was pushing me, but not in a forceful manner. The room is connected to another room that had a darker history. Bob told us to open the door and asked if we felt something different. Everyone told him that it was colder in the room despite the doors and windows being tightly shut. Some of our EMF detectors went crazy. According to Bob, there are 4 resident ghosts inside this room. 2 children who love to play hide and seek, and a woman, as well as a malevolent spirit of an old man. There were stories circulating that one group who stayed overnight in the hospital decided to record themselves singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and caught something in the recording. They heard children giggling, and a woman saying, "Wait, wait," and an angry voice of a male shouting to get out. Jace had his EMF detector pointed near the cupboard and it went crazy. So what he did? He went and got his smartphone and started recording himself singing the same song. Actually, we were all at the center of the room and didn't hear him singing. After we went out, we played his recording, and believe it or not, he caught something. There weren't disembodied voices from the children or from the woman, but in the middle of his singing, someone was shouting in the background, "Your singing stinks!" The third stop was the gravedigger's house. It apparently was one of the most haunted parts of the complex. It's so haunted that Bob won't dig deeper into its bloody history. It used to be the house of the gravedigger and the doctor. Just a few steps from the house is the third-class cabin. During that time, there were reports of missing girls and children. Eyewitness reports claimed they saw some kids and girls entering the gravedigger's house. More so, the doctor was attached to the girls, especially the young ones. The house is a bungalow, which has 2 bedrooms with a small living room, dining room, and the kitchen and bathroom are both located at the back part of the house. Bob left us there for 10 minutes. The first room to the right used to be the bedroom of a paedophile doctor. As I slowly entered the room, the atmosphere drastically changed. It felt cold and sad at the same time. I don't know. I can't help but be sad in that room. I went out right away because I could no longer take the sadness. The second room was rather weird. I was about to enter there, but something felt wrong. It's like there's a force barring me from entering the room. Some of my group mates checked their EMF and it went crazy. I guess everyone was not welcome inside. The back portion where the kitchen and bathroom are located was the scariest part of the house. It was dark, but that part of the house was faintly illuminated by the moon outside. I stayed there for at least 3 minutes to just observe, and I suddenly felt goosebumps all over my body. As I neared the bathroom, it felt sinister, and I didn't go inside because my instincts told me not to. I managed to take photos inside the house, and my phone didn't catch anything paranormal, but all photos are creepy as hell. When everyone was outside, Bob confessed that the bathroom was the most haunted part of the house. Locals claimed that a girl was brutally murdered inside the bathroom. She got strangled by barbed wire. The fourth stop was the morgue. I never liked going to a morgue anyway, especially a dark and abandoned one. I was very nervous the moment we entered. To add to the scare factor, a mannequin lying at the center covered with a white cloth. I know it's staged, but it still scared the hell out of me. While Bob was talking about its history, It started getting cold, but weirdly only on my right side. No one was standing to my right, and there was nothing but a door leading to the laboratory. A cold breeze passed through. I wasn't paying attention to Bob's story because I felt someone standing near me. I whispered to Jace about it, and he scanned his EMF, and suddenly there was a spike of energy. He told me to calm down, but I was this close to breaking down. As minutes went by, I started to feel goosebumps on my right arm, and I can feel that someone is actually touching it. It was like a gentle caress, but definitely not human. I became uneasy after we went out the morgue, and Bob noticed it. He smiled and said, "There isn't a ghost like you, did he?" Really, Bob. The next stop was the shower block. It is the most haunted place in the whole of Q Station. During the time that those who are sick must take a shower of carbonic acid, not water. The acid kills fleas and ticks in seconds, and 2 days after your skin starts to peel off. It was dark and eerie as we entered the shower block. The stench was still there, and I felt lightheaded. The same feeling when you get out of a boat ride. Bob told us that there are shadows lurking around the dark corners, and for 15 minutes we were instructed to roam around and observe. He told us to go to the corners where we felt the most uncomfortable. I had goosebumps as we passed by the center aisle and turned right since we both felt uneasy on this side. As we were walking back to the center aisle, I felt someone watching us from behind, so instinctively we turned our heads slowly and saw a dark figure peering from the corner of the block. I am pretty much sure that my friend wasn't playing tricks on me. The figure was tall, about 7 feet tall, and it was darker than dark, and all of a sudden the figure came right after us. I don't know what happened next, but Jason and I were back at the main door of the block in a jiffy. Whatever that is, it scared the hell out of me. The tour lasted for 3 hours, and was already half midnight when we went back to the parking lot safe and sound. I honestly don't know what to feel after the tour. I was physically and mentally exhausted. Nonetheless, it was still a great experience. It finally validated that I am a bit sensitive to the paranormal. I do believe in ghosts, and don't easily get scared by them. But my experience at Q Station was overwhelming. A lot can happen in 3 hours. When I was between the ages of 11 and 12, I was staying at my father's house, which my little brother and I did every other weekend as our parents were separated. I remember experiencing my first and only spout of sleep paralysis the weekend before. I wasn't able to move, complete fear consuming every part of my soul. I did the toe curls and finger wiggles to get myself out, but never once opened my eyes because I was afraid, and had never experienced seeing anything during that time. However, this weekend, that I had the previous experience completely out of my mind, I figured it was just a nightmare, you know? So it was a normal night and we went to bed around 10:30. The same routine, and the same kind of setting with nothing out of the ordinary. I wake up like normal but early, at around 6 a.m. on this Saturday. The sun rose and I remember the room completely lit with the sunshine, but I knew it was early, and I was on the bottom bunk of a bunk bed with my little brother on top. I woke up and was wide awake. I felt completely rested and amazing, something us adults don't truly experience anymore, sadly. It was one of those wake-ups where you stretch and smile, like you're in a complete state of satisfaction. I do so and then relax, with a good feeling flowing through me. We had a large box TV in our bedroom that was about 6 feet away from me on a TV stand, and in the middle of the TV was an inch or two above my eye level when laying on the bed. In the middle of my blissful relaxed state, I turned my head casually and looked at the shut-off TV that sat before me. I could almost see the entire room. Like I said, the TV was big, but the first thing that caught my eye was the thing that almost gave me a heart attack. What I saw was something very tall, naked, leaning its head over the bars of the bunk bed ladder. It was directly above me, and only inches away from the top of my head. It was crouched over, with its head just above mine and looking down at me. It did, and still does to this day, remind me of the aliens from the movie The Signs. I mostly died right then and there, My heart has never dropped so hard into an adrenaline beat, I'm not even sure if I was breathing. I was a very smart kid and did the only thing I thought was best at the time, with the pounding of my chest increasing at a rate faster than anything considered alive. I played like I didn't see it, slowly rolled over and casually grabbed my blanket to cover my head. I figured if I didn't know it was there, it couldn't get me. I lay there with my heart beating out of my chest for probably an hour and a half until I grew the courage, ripped the blankets off, and flipped over to meet it face to face. But it was gone. I've never forgotten it, never tried to forget it, never tried to disprove it. The only thing I've ever done is accept it. What I saw was real, in my room, and I probably stared at it in shock for over 20 seconds, not in disbelief, but in complete and traumatizing fear. I went from ecstasy and complete satisfaction to the most fearful I've ever been in my entire life. If you want to know what I think, it was that the thing fed off fear. It allowed me to feel beyond great in order for me to produce the thickest amount of solid fear anyone can make, and that's exactly what it got. I woke up to my dog jumping off the foot of my bed when he was sleeping and lightly barking. The way he alerts the house is if he hears people in the lawn or otherwise suspects intruders. He's a good guard dog. I'm still a little out of it when this happened, so the ghostly sound sort of passes me for a bit while I try to calm the dog down. But then I start to hear it. A very rhythmic, loud inhale right beside my bedroom window. No exhales, just inhales, over and over and over. I'm frozen in place in my bed, and I do a reality check since I'm no stranger to sleep paralysis. That's how strange this experience was. My mind immediately went to, I'm not even awake, this isn't real. But alas, I was, and I am writing this, and it's only been 10 minutes. The sounds went on for maybe 2 minutes from the moment I woke up. No idea how long they were going for before that, but probably not long since my dog alerted them so strongly when he initially noticed them. Then they just stopped. My dog laid down on the foot of my bed, seemingly telling me that the danger was over. But God, it was so incredibly close to my window. If it was some sort of machinery in the house, which I want to believe, and it is the only logical reasoning I can come up with at the moment, the next issue becoming identifying what type of machinery sounds so similar to a person inhaling rhythmically, not to mention the location of where it happened. Let me clarify, my bedroom is on the 2nd floor, so we can all collectively rule out the possibility of there being a human person standing outside my window. When I was around 5 to 6, my parents got a pair of twin-size mattresses second-hand from a family that didn't want to take them with them when they moved away. I got one and my younger brother got one. We were excited to have them since they were our first big kid beds compared to our previous beds. That first night I remember waking up because something shook my bed, like I heard it squeak and shake. I awoke and screamed for my mum. She told me it was just a dream and to go back to sleep. This happened again the next few nights. Then my mum and dad got fed up with it and told me to stop waking them up. My mum prayed over my bed for it to stop moving, and that night I slept fine and my mattress didn't move again for several more nights. Then one night I awoke to what felt like something moving inside the mattress under me, like a finger running up and down my spine. I remember telling my mum it felt like a rat or cockroach crawling up and down my back. She must have thought I was crazy, because she ignored my complaints that it kept waking me up. It was around this time I began to see figures in the hall, and instead of waking them I just snuck into their bed. This was a pattern that continued until I was too big to sneak into their bed, and dealt with some insomnia and sleep paralysis for several years. 7 years later my parents finally bought me a new mattress, and I remembered the first night sleeping on it was like heaven. It didn't move or anything. I told my mum that I was so happy because the mattress didn't move, and she was shocked because she thought I had just grown out of it. I had 2 uncles who weren't related to each other. They'd each married one of my dad's sisters. They were good friends though, because their wives were close, so they would take joint vacations and co-host parties and things. One of them died and his widow bought him a plot in a certain cemetery. 2 years later, the other one died, and his widow ended up buying the plot in the same cemetery, figuring she could bury her husband next to her brother-in-law. That way they wouldn't be alone. So I'm at funeral number 2, standing in a cemetery on a snowy day, about to bury my second uncle in as many years. Suddenly, I hear a sizzle. I blink, and instead of a cemetery, I'm staring at the backyard of my second uncle's beach house. My first uncle is at the barbecue grill, and he turns to me and says, "Do you want any lamb?" Then my second uncle walks up with paper plates ready to serve. I blink and I'm back in the cemetery. I don't think that ghosts roam the earth, but I'm pretty sure I had a vision of where they both went, together on a vacation, waiting for more family to arrive. I went hunting with my cousin once, up on a mountain where we live. We were bow hunting, and he tells me to go over the hill and sit. I go and sit between some downed trees, sit there about 20 to 30 minutes, and I close my eyes and listen a little better. I hear a growl about a foot away from my face. Sounds big too. I open my eyes and nothing. Nowhere. So I sit for a few more minutes and close my eyes again. I had my bow sitting across my leg, and something jerks the bow, like a couple of inches. Definitely not to get my attention. I was like, screw this and get up. As I'm going back up the hill, I look, and there are old clothes everywhere. I don't know if someone had died up there or what, but it's the mountains east of Kentucky. Stuff happens, and there's room to dump bodies without people knowing. This next story happened to my kid. We lived in public housing at the time. Later found out they had moved a cemetery to build the apartments. First time when he was around 4, he came running from the hallway between the kitchen and living room and hides behind the recliner I'm in. You could look straight into the kitchen dining room from where I was. He peeks around and says there's a man staring at me. I think, what? And go look out the door and window, but there's nothing. I tell him there's no one out there. He's still hiding and he says, he's still there. I tell him there isn't. I get goosebumps and ask what he's doing. Just look at me, I say. That's when it all started. He told us there was a woman who lived in his closet, who had scraggly hair and was mean. He never slept in there. He would just randomly say, "Do you see the girl? She's wearing a flower dress." He spoke of multiple ghosts the time we lived there. But another time I was going to our bedroom on the 2nd floor. My wife worked 3rd shift and was asleep. I go up and get her before work, and when I got to the top of the steps, she sits and says, "Who's that woman?" I tell her our son is behind me and that's it. "No, there's a woman behind you. And I thought she was riding on your back, she was so close." There's a whole load more encounters that I can't remember off the top of my head. But as you can imagine, living on top of an ex-graveyard is creepy. About 15 years ago, in the small town of Darlington, Indiana, my mother had a couple of paranormal experiences. I was around 3 or 4 at the time, so I can't speak of my experience. My mother has only had paranormal experiences ever when she lived here. When we first moved, there was a dog that we had called Diamond. She went outside to tie the dog to the only tree in our yard when she met our neighbor, who she described as a crazy old lady. The old lady told her that if she were to tie her dog to the tree, it would go mad. It happened to the last 2 neighbors, and my mum just dismissed her as crazy. My mum would see our dog at night playing around and barking. She said that ghost dogs would come from our forest behind our house and play with him. Slowly over time, our dog became more and more aggressive. He'd attack anyone who would come in range except me. He'd let me play with him though, and I could go by him and pet him, and I'd even put rocks in his mouth and he wouldn't care. But after a while he became so aggressive we couldn't even get close to feeding him, so my mum had to put him down. A few days later, my mum said she experienced the scariest thing of her life. She said that one night, She was in bed without my dad since he was at the hospital during cancer treatments. I was in my bedroom sleeping at the time, and she said that she woke up to the sound of a water sprinkler outside our trailer. She saw our cat staring at the end of the bed at the window where the sound was coming from. She got up and looked outside to see flames being spat from just the air. She looked for a minute as it slowly approached the trailer, and she ran back to bed and hid under the covers and prayed that it would go away. The next morning there were no signs of any burn marks, and the entity never returned. We finally moved from the trailer about 3 years later when my dad passed away in the trailer of melanoma. What's your guys' idea on what this could have been? My grandfather was a labourer, and my grandmother was a housewife, so at the time they tended to travel from place to place until the work was done, and they would move on to the next place. My grandfather was from the Natchez, Mississippi area. They moved into a house that had a fireplace, and the one thing she remembered about this house was that there was a dark spot on the floor, and no matter how hard they scrubbed it, it would never come up. When it rained, it became extremely slippery, and the water that came off it would look like blood. There was always a stench during this time, and nothing would curtail it. Nothing would stop it when the rain came. The stench was so oppressive. So one day my grandmother and grandfather asked the man who owned the house what happened. At first he was quiet, but then he told them that the wife of the previous tenant had hung herself one day when her husband was at work in the fields, and he came home to find her swinging from the rafters, and that she had bled out on that very spot. Well, my grandfather was your typical male who really didn't give in to all the spooky and scary ghost stories. But my grandmother wouldn't drop the subject that she wanted to move, and she was going to move with or without him anyway. The argument broke off, and the next day he went to work out in the fields. A few hours later he left, and the sky got really dark, and there was a thunderstorm on my way, and my grandmother had my father, my uncle, and my aunt, all over them a few years apart, and she went about her daily routine. The rain came in for some reason, and she had to step outside the room. I believe it was the living room, and she left the children in there. She came back and saw this woman that had somehow gotten into the house. She didn't hear a knock on the door, as it was either locked or latched. She would have known if someone had come in. So she called her children over to her because she was scared at the time. The woman was wearing a dingy gown and also had stringy hair and pale skin. Her eyes were coming out of her head as she started walking towards her. So my grandmother, along with 3 small children, ran into the back bedroom, and the woman followed. About this time, my grandmother is fully convinced that this woman is an apparition, and she is afraid for herself, but for her children. About this time, my grandmother is fully convinced that this woman is an apparition, and she is afraid for herself, but for her children as well. The woman comes into the room and stands at the door, and the look on her face is like she was staring through it. Every time my grandmother asks what's wrong, what do you want, and what can I do for you, you'd no reply, because her family had always told her that if an apparition approached her, they were just trying to tell what happened and the reason they left, and trying to make peace. When my grandmother got through speaking, the woman looked up at her, and my grandmother saw the rope burns on her neck, and she let out a very eerie deep moan. My grandmother said that while this was occurring, she kept smelling damp earth and leaves. She also said that before this happened, that spot on the floor, for lack of a better term, was more wet and slippery than usual. This comes from my stepmother, who heard it from her grandmother, and this happened in a place called So-So, Mississippi. This was at a time right before the Great Depression, or maybe the late 1800s, somewhere in that time, but exactly which year I can't say. One day when everyone was out in the field, a stranger started walking up the road towards the house. There's nothing really odd about him, he just doesn't have a whole lot to say. So of course my grandmother's father goes out to meet him and starts a conversation with him and talks a little bit, and decides that he seems reasonably okay, so they invite him inside for a meal. They chat with him for a bit, and they offer him a place to stay for the night as he's passing through. He doesn't act nervous. He is extremely calm. Anyway, towards the evening, for some odd reason, the man dies. So my grandmother's father sends his son to get the country coroner so that he can get the body of the man that's in the living room so that they can have him laid out on a table and do the formal proceedings. The man and his sons go and get the coroner, and they lock the door and they tell everyone they'll be back, when they can just keep the door locked until they arrive. It's about 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, so they know it's going to take a few hours because they have to go by foot, as there are no horses nor carts to take. At 8 o'clock, the doors are locked, the lights are on, and people are just sitting around this time, for lack of a better term. And a thing walks into the room. It's short, stocky, has spikes and a tail and floppy pointed ears, muscular, and maybe the tallest point is 4 feet. It doesn't say a word, and people don't know how it got in. No one heard the door slam. No one heard the door close. They just know that whatever it was you want to call it had eyes, and they are cherry red and fangs protruding from its mouth. It walked up to the table towards the dead man. It doesn't speak, it doesn't look at anyone. It doesn't make a sound, but simply picks up the man like a rag doll, puts the man on his shoulders and walks through the door and disappears. This happened to my father when he was a younger man, and a great uncle. They had decided to go drinking and decided to go to this local church. Their mother and aunt told them not to do it, but the alcohol, of course, is sitting in, and they wanted to have some fun. So they walk a couple of miles and start beating and banging on the piano, turning the lights on and off. When all of a sudden, the lights get shut off, but not by my uncle or my father, but mysteriously just cut off. And when they do, my father, who is beating and banging the piano, feels an iron grip grab his legs, and it doesn't let go of him for a few minutes. But when it finally does, they are both incredibly sober. So they take a moment to run to the door, but it won't open. They claim it's like an iron bar in front of it, keeping it shut. They sober up even more, and when the door is finally released and they can leave, they run the 2 miles back home whiter than cotton, and that was the first and last time they ever decided to mess around in church. Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's paranormal stories. A nice little mix of locations, all spooky stuff. You know, funny thing, it's in the secret message section the other day, or maybe at the end of the video, I'd mentioned that my grandma saw she dreamt about a young girl ghost and an older woman ghost. And she came down for breakfast and she said this, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And then my wife was like, I saw a shadow that I thought was Pandora go into the closet. And when I turned, she was in the bed next to us, and I was like, oh yeah, that's weird. To clarify, it's a smaller bed next to our bed. And then she got freaked out. She didn't wake me though, so I didn't see anything. Nah, but I would love to see one day. But it's been a bit creepy in our house at nighttime, especially because all of this is like fresh. So we're like, ooh. And yesterday, we were making a cake, and we put the ingredients in a blender, some of the ingredients, to make it smooth. And after we'd turned the button off but not unplugged it, it turned on by itself. I mean, that could just be electronics, right? But still, it adds to the creep factor. So I will update you if anything more tangible happens. But yeah, spooky. Not, I haven't actually witnessed any of these things. They've always happened when I'm conveniently out the room, but I did hear the blender go on. Or was asleep. But in any case, I just wanted to let you know. So yeah, thank you all for listening to my ramblings. I'm going to draw your attention again to Warren and his channel, Warning to the Curious, link in the description and on screen right now. So did he see a skinwalker, or was it something else entirely? Why don't you let him know? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'll probably go over there and see what you wrote. So stay awesome, maybe see you there, and I'll see you in the next one.